All right, I'm going to do just a little video here. I mentioned on Twitter a little while back that I was working on like the super secret project. And if you watched my stream and review 2019, I spotlighted or spotlit, however you want to say it, one particular streamer that I watch quite a bit nowadays. And his name is Cracen. He does this JRPG tour where he's on a mission to basically play every JRPG ever made. Asterisk, there's some caveats in there and stuff like that, I believe. But I managed to win a raffle for one of the games that he was going to play, and I chose Black Sigil. Now, you might remember my playthrough of that game, and it was kind of a wild ride. But since I chose the game for him, his playthrough was significantly different than mine, and I thought it would be really, really interesting to kind of take a deep dive into it. So I basically cataloged all the random encounter information that he did. Now, there's a couple differences between the way I did it and the way I did it for my playthrough versus the way I did it for his playthrough. And the biggest differences are I went way overboard with his, whereas mine, I didn't. In mine, all I did was basically count all the random encounters that I had cut from my playthrough. Whereas for his playthrough, I did a breakdown of every single encounter that he went through. So I thought it would be kind of cool to go through some of the a great deal of the information that I cataloged for it, just throw it up on the YouTube, to have a little fun with it. Just in case, there are a couple screenshots in here of locations, and there are location names. Basically, nearly all locations are going to be listed here. So if you don't want any spoilers, there's your out right there. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of scroll through some of this stuff and, give you a better idea of how crazy this game can be. So if I were to scroll down, I basically did a VOD breakdown for his stream. He did a total of 10 streams and put in almost 40 hours, I believe, into the game. And, you can kind of see that there. Basically, my thought process for the VOD breakdown was how long the VOD was, and then how much time was spent in encounters for that VOD, the total number of encounters in that VOD, and then the percentage of encounters that made up that particular VOD. So for example, in part 1, 35% of that VOD was encounters. And the only difference is part 10. I actually stopped the VOD time right when he finished the credits and was going into his review of the game and whatnot. So as you can see, some of this information is quite interesting. My particular playthrough was about 42% random encounter time, and you can actually see he's been getting some interesting numbers with this, particularly in part 8 and part 10 being the highest. I then took things a little bit further and I went into encounter types. And so for encounter types, we basically have 3 sections. We have battle type, where I section them off as random encounters, boss encounters, story encounters, and optional encounters. First 2 are self-explanatory. Story encounters I basically classified as if there's no other way to get past that particular encounter, to progress the game, then it would be a story encounter. Whereas optional, you don't have to do it, but you do it anyways. And you can kind of see there, quite a bit of time is spent put in to just the types of encounters, which is pretty crazy. For the total encounters, that's pretty self-explanatory. For encounter time percentage, that's how much time those encounters took out of the grand total of all the encounters. So for random encounters, that was 62% of all encounters that Cracen basically did. For encounter percent, that's basically how many encounters. Where encounter time is the total time. Encounter percent is how many of those encounters took up the total number of encounters. So 90% of encounters were random encounters. And then stream percent, how much of those encounters took out of the total combined VOD time. So 30% of his entire playthrough was just random encounters, as an example. For then battle location, I also kind of separated things via dungeon, world map, and town fights. So here, the vast majority of the game is going to be dungeons, but you know what? I don't have... Oh, yes, I do. Yeah, the vast majority of them are going to be dungeons, so that's just going to be a lot of it. I mean, 71% of all encounters were dungeon encounters. But in here, I added a different stat, runaway percent. In my particular playthrough, I didn't know how to run away from encounters. I had to use a particular character, Brogard, to run away from encounters. But Cracen figured out how to run from encounters in the House of Blackstone. And that proved to be quite a boon for him because he ran away from a lot of encounters since that started. As you can see, 71% of all encounters were dungeon encounters, and he ran away from 67% of all dungeon encounters, which is insane. Absolutely insane. Moving on to the other section, this is where I kind of sectioned off things a little bit differently. So for fights, how many encounters he fought, how many times he died, how many times or how many battles he grinded, and how many times he ran away. Ran away from 974 encounters. If you remember my stats, the grand total was like 801 encounters that were cut from my playthrough. He ran from more encounters than I cut, which is crazy. Absolutely crazy. 60% of encounters he ran from. That is wild. And then here's the glossary of just basically what some of these little headers mean and whatnot, which, I kind of already explained a little bit. And then for locations, I mentioned that I basically logged all the locations where he did battles. There's a few caveats here. There are some locations that have different names, but are like sectioned off basically from his or from the other place. So for example, Bellinora, there's Bellinora the world map, and then there's Bellinora the castle dungeon map, and there's Bellinora the town. So I basically just lump all those into Bellinora. But if it's a dungeon, I'll label it as dungeon. If it's the world map, I'll label it as world map. So, everything kind of gets nice and tidy there. So yeah, these are just kind of some of the stats. The same thing happened with Ceremaze. There's a Ceremaze temple, which you might recall from when you have to release the seals. So I just lumped them all into Ceremaze. And yeah, just going through this stuff. The Melmoth Sands, funnily enough, he made the mistake that many of us probably made. And by many, I mean all 5 of us that have played the game on YouTube, that is. And that was go into there, fight a random encounter, and die to it. I think I did that as well. House of Blackstone, everybody's favorite dungeon. That is total and complete sarcasm, by the way, because that dungeon is rough times. As you can see, this is the point where he started to run away. And you could see, like, oh, in the Melmoth Sands, he ran away from a bunch of encounters. Or Cascadilla, he ran from him, blah, blah, blah. That all didn't happen until the House of Blackstone. There's a couple times where he went back into the Melmoth Sands or this area. And then obviously the Sarah dungeon that happens very late in the game. And then Artania, blah, 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 this and that. The world map where House of Blackstone basically is. So this is basically when he did it. And, you know, as you can see, you know, he had to fight a lot of encounters before he got to run away from them, or before he figured that out. But after that, you're going to start seeing this number go crazy for dungeons. Scythier is another example. Scythier the town, there's Scythier the castle, yada yada, this and that. Tida's Reef, he actually went in there once and he fought that particular encounter, but he didn't actually go like this far. He didn't hardly do any side quests, or any side quests actually. He had a rough time with the game, but everybody has a rough time with the game. So just kind of going through this, the Ring of Memories, interestingly enough, he kind of got stuck in the same spot that I did, where, you know, you got to find how to open up that one particular bookshelf. So I thought that was interesting. Arco Skybase, another example of a place where you have to, or where there's like the Skybase later on, and then there's the Skybase at the very beginning, you know, like where you fight those particular soldiers and steal their equipment and whatnot. Let's see. Going through this a little bit more. He wasn't able, or there was a lot of opportunities where he didn't have to fight a bunch of encounters, but, you know, he opted to do so. Like for the Black Rift, like when he became a spirit after the Eerie Caves, he thought it might be a good time to actually fight the battles that he ran into, because he was hardly taking any damage, which was a pretty good idea. So, you know, I kind of applaud him for that. Let me see. Abraxas's Tower, he didn't have a very good time there. He ran from 91%. Basically every single random encounter. Anytime you're going to see 90% encounters ran away from, that's going to be all the random encounters. Basically anything that hasn't been run away from there is like story encounters or boss encounters, etc. Temple of the Key, that he had a very, very rough time with that particular dungeon. The Scytherian Bridge fight, he actually died once there, so that's why there was 2 encounters. He kind of got caught off guard, and you could probably take the assumption here that he ran away from a lot of fights, so he was gonna he would by chance then have a rough time with all the other fights later on. And he did. In the Dimensional Flux, he spent a lot of time there. A lot. He spent 5 hours there, ran away from 86% encounters, and it took him quite a while to beat the final boss. It was pretty crazy. And then these are the final stats. It took him 39 hours to beat the game, 39 and a half hours. The total time that encounters took for his playthrough was 18 hours, 43 minutes. That 18 hours, 43 minutes was 47% of his total playthrough. And he fought a total of 1,615 encounters. That is more than double the encounters that I cut from my playthrough. So that in of itself was pretty insane. So I drafted this up and I sent it over to him to look over in his review, and that was a whole lot of fun to kind of see him go through all this information and see how that went about. How I collected this information is on the handy dandy Google Sheets, where basically, you could just kind of see all the information and how I kind of separated it. I have all this VOD information down here. I separated all of this stuff. And then there's also a little bit of other information here, like death percent. 1% of his deaths were to random encounters, 32% were to bosses, and then 29% of his total deaths were random encounters. And then I also have them all separated here. I wanted to show. See, he only grinded a couple of times. This particular instance, he was just going for a level. I don't remember this one. This one, he like, I'm gonna go for a grinding session because I need money or something like that. And then he also did a grinding session here, where at this point in the game, he's ran away from a crap ton of encounters. So he said, all right, I need to get some levels, try to catch up, see what I could do. Interestingly enough, the total death percent here, 42% of all of his deaths were in the final dungeon. And most of those were, well, some of those were because of the pest spirit that gives you angry face or berserk or fury or whatever it's called. And, you basically just die if you don't have immunity to it. And so he ran into that issue quite a few times. But I would say the majority of his deaths are to the final boss, I believe. But, we can check that. So that's all that information. And then here is how basically I tracked all of his encounters. Let's see. I did this all manually, by the way. I don't have any coding experience, any real world coding experience. I could do some what I would consider fancy things in Map Tool, for example. But I basically just went through all the VODs and wrote down all this information. And used nice little whatchamacallits and whatnot. Anytime an encounter is more than a minute and 30 seconds, I believe, I highlighted it so that I can make sure that was actually a valid encounter. Because if I entered in the wrong times or whatever, I wanted to make sure I was accounting for that, as well as anything 10 seconds or less. Was also something that was getting highlighted. So you can see right here, an hour and basically 30 minutes into this particular VOD is when he first figured out that he could run away. And you can kind of see he's just running. It's a lot of running. So yeah, here's the 10 seconds or less. And then this basically just continues the whole way through. I total everything here at the beginning and just go through it all. This was quite the ordeal, but it was totally worth it to kind of see everyone's reactions and chat and whatnot. And I just wanted to kind of show this to anybody on YouTube that might be interested in a more in-depth stats than what I provided for my particular playthrough. And maybe this has inspired you to play the game and kind of do the struggle for yourself and see how crazy you can get this game to be. He actually ended the game much lower level than I was. I beat the game at level 60. He was like 40, I don't know, like 46, 48, something like that. Like, I was quite a few levels higher than him. But when you run away from 60% of the encounters, you know, you're gonna have a rough time. His biggest issue was basically equipment. He kind of stopped exploring for the most part, and that's where a lot of his issues arose. And you can kind of see some of these encounters that he had to fight were pretty lengthy ones too. He ran away from a lot of the lengthy encounters like Isopolis and, I mean, basically all the dimensional flux fights. These are, you know, 2 to 6 minute fights. It's wild. But let's see. Here, I believe this is where he starts the boss attempts, and you can kind of see how long these fights take, and then he has to do all these random encounters just to get back to the boss. And, you know, it's a huge struggle. Here's a 32-minute death on phase 2. It's absolutely wild. But yeah, took him 25 minutes. His strategy was actually a really interesting strategy, and we were kind of theory crafting on his Discord how he could beat the boss. And the strategy that was mentioned was actually the strategy that he ended up figuring out on his own, and he knocked out the boss. So pretty happy with how he went about it. If you are interested in let's see, visiting his channel, I'm sure he's hosting somebody right now, but you can visit twitch.tv/Cracen. Right now he's playing through Gen d'Arc, the tactics game on the PSP. And he's also doing some Castlevania marathons and things like that. He's a pretty cool guy, you know. He has very strong opinions. He's a very stubborn guy when it comes to doing things. But I mean, once you go into his playthroughs and you say, all right, this guy wants absolutely no help or spoilers. He wants it to be 100% completely blind. You know, you just go in with that mindset, and it's a really fun experience to kind of see him do his brute force tactics. But that's gonna wrap it up for me. Just wanted to kind of showcase that. So thanks for watching, appreciate it. See ya next time. Peace.